All right. Good morning, everyone. We're excited again this morning to talk about wraps and SubTos and all things creative financing. Good morning, Alan. I trust that you're doing well. Look forward to our call today.
Morning. Good to see you. Doing great. Ready to wrap.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, last week you were talking about the importance of finding how RABs are occurring in the marketplace, the statistics of what's occurring. And, one of the things I'm finding, Alan, I don't know about your end, and maybe I can get some of your feedback, is that sellers are preferring to go to a seller finance wrap sometimes over a bank because the rates are almost the same right now.
Yeah. So my I guess explanation or analogy is, when we were back there in COVID, market was booming. Buyers didn't like that. They're paying more dollars now, market downturn, and sellers don't. We're in a unique situation where the interest rate's up there at 7% or so. Sellers want to sell seller finance to capture some of that marginal dollars there, and buyer wants to buy seller finance and not have to go out and get a conventional mortgage. So we're kind of at like we said last time, perfect storm. That's just part of the perfect storm.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we want to welcome everyone. This is Alex Sanders with Alex Sanders Realty Investment Group. I'm part of the Texas Premier Realty licensed agent, been doing SubTos and creative financing, wholesale deals, all types of deals for about 17 years in San Antonio, but primarily, actually all of Texas. We sell in Houston and Dallas and Austin, Corpus. And I focus primarily on SubTos, Alan, as you know, and the wrap, right? And the wrap is such a beautiful process. I mean, I absolutely love the wrap. I love filling out the forms. I love talking to sellers about it. I mean, I just love the wrap, but I also love the SubTo because it is such a out of the box thinking for the average real estate agent like myself, right? We're not taught that. Yeah. And of course, we welcome Alan Cheska from Cheska Title Group and Law, and anybody that's looking to close, you've got to come over to Cheska Group to close your deals, all types of deals. What kind of services do you offer in your title group right now, Alan?
So I like to say we're exactly the same as a corporate-owned title office, except we have the law office that's there to support. So if you're over there with Fidelity Title and a lien pops up on a file, the in-house counsel over there, they have an attorney, but they can't take off their title hat, put on the lawyer hat, and go over there and start fixing that while we can. So we're just a title office on steroids.
Okay. Now, when you say steroids, you're talking about, let's say there's dirty title, you're going to clean that up. There's difficult titles, you're going to be able to work with that. And then sometimes even trying to track down those errors that nobody else can seem to find.
Yeah, when they can't be found at all, then we got solutions for that. Really, the best example is an abstract of judgment, a notice to the world that there's a judgment against the seller. When that pops up on Schedule C, a title office is going to hand the file back and say, hey, there's a lien on this. You need to pay it and get a release. We get to go over there and release that lien. So if you're buying a property subject to and you're paying all closing costs and a lien from Bank of America pops up for $5,000, the seller's not paying that. So that just reduces your cost to get into that property. We go and get a release for that $5,000 because it can't be on a homestead property. But we're able to do that because I can take off my title hat, put on my lawyer hat, and start representing either party in the transaction legally.
Yeah. Have you ever had any issues where somebody brings you a property and the land, maybe just the land itself, is landlocked? What options are there?
Yeah, we have. So the law does not want property to not be used. So there's pretty lenient laws about getting access to that property. So if they've been using something previously for a long time, then there could be an easement that's mandated to be used. If no one's been using it ever, then we start talking about necessity for an easement and looking for that. So again, the law abhors the property because they want it to be used and tax it more. So the laws kind of lean towards the unlocking of that land.
Yeah, interesting. So let's focus on what we were going to talk today about is, in itself on how to deal with the step-by-step process of how do we look at SubTos, and then the step-by-step process on how do we deal with wraps. So as a generalized form, Alan, what are we looking at? Because there's obviously more than 4 steps, and there's quite a bit of steps. What should we be prepared for?
So you'll hear me if you come listen to me talk about a mortgage wrap, whether it's the 1-hour program, 2-hour program, 4-hour program, the online, everything. You're going to hear me say that a mortgage wrap or a subject to is just seller financing. If you conceptualize it as seller financing and ignore the fact that there's an underlying lien, at least at the beginning, then you're going to be able to, what I say, demystify and understand these transactions much, much more easily. So I've hired escrow officers and they come in, they're from a conventional title office. They say, I don't understand this. I say, it's seller financing. And then for the next month or two, they come in and say, I just don't really get it. And then about month 3, they come in and go, oh, it's just seller financing. And I say, yes, it's just seller financing. And then once you start getting into structuring and contracting, if it's a SubTo, we're mentioning the underlying mortgage. If it's a wrap, we're not even mentioning that underlying mortgage in the contracting. So just need to think of them as just normal seller finance. Yeah.
So many times, so here's an issue, right, that I have when I'm talking to with let's say an agent, right, and he's had a property 120 days, maybe even 180 days, long time. And what I like to do is I like to call those properties that have been on the market for that long, talk to the agent about how can we take that property over, help the seller, still sell the property. What's a natural conversation? Because many agents, the moment you mention creative financing, seller financing, I don't even want to say subject to, because they just freak out. Like that's, that's so, and so just talking about that, for those that are listening that are wanting to get into more of the creative financing, the SubTo transaction, what's a good template of point 1, 2, 3, 4? This is how it should sound like talking to an agent.
So I was just walking my dog last week, saw a property that was for sale. I knew it was for sale previously for a long time, and then they took it off the market, probably did some make ready and stuff like that and put it back. So I called the agent. And here's exactly what I said. I said, hey, I'm in the neighborhood, also an investor, maybe interested in buying property. Will your seller be interested in maybe seller finance? So I'm not saying wrap, like you said, not saying SubTo. And then the immediate response is, well, there's an existing mortgage on here. And then I'll say, that's good. There's actually a way to sell it seller finance, even though that mortgage doesn't get paid off. My question, I guess, would be, does your seller need to pay off that mortgage to get into their next property? Now here, the house was empty and had been empty for more than a year. I guess they may have rented it for a little while. So I knew they didn't have to pay it off to get to their next property. So no, they don't. They're already renting, or no, they don't. They already have a house or what have you. And then when they say that, you say, good, then it's very easy to structure a seller finance transaction using a mortgage wrap. and then they'll say something to the effect of they're illegal, or whatever they say, and then you say, well, no, fortunately they're legal. Legislature just passed some legislation 2 years ago that's in effect now that tells us how to legally do these, how to do them correctly, and so I'd like to sit down and talk with you about what's available for your client and sell this property fast via seller finance, and also probably sell it for more than fair market value seller finance if they want to. And so that's my conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And it sounds obviously very credible to that skeptic agent who says, well, show me where title and verse, where this may be. Is there a cheat sheet that you have as a simple one page that, let's say I'm submitting an offer to an agent and he doesn't understand it. I said, let me send you an email, read this through, then let's touch base back again and talk through. Is there such a thing?
Yep. So actually created, so I have about a 8, 9, 10 page frequently asked questions document that I put together. And I thought, well, this will be helpful for everyone. And then it turned out it's a little too much legalese, a little too long. And so someone said, Alan, can you give me a one pager? And so I finally, I think it's 3 weeks ago, created a one page document that just explains in high level layman's terms what a mortgage wrap is. And then we also have the Senate Bill 43 is the legislature that was passed a couple years ago. And we have a document that details what's required there. However, if it's a end user seller selling to me, they don't have to comply with Senate Bill 43, SAFE Act, T-SAFE Act, don't have to comply with Dodd-Frank. So I kind of don't broach that. I wouldn't give them information in regard to the laws if they're a end user seller selling to me.
Gotcha. Right. So you're going direct to seller, but even though the agent's involved, you're just going direct to the seller. You don't have to have all those necessary.
I mean, I provide that document to the agent to provide to the seller. Now, 15, 20 years ago, I was going to get my real estate license, and right when I was done with everything, getting ready to take the test, I realized, wait a minute, I don't want my license, because then I can't do an end run around the agents and go direct, which I'm going to do at some point in time. So I didn't get my license. So I sometimes I'll go direct if my agent is not understanding, if they're, I don't know how to put this since we're being broadcast out there, but sometimes agents are a tad jealous, let's say. So I might do an end run around them.
I fully understand. I deal with that every single day, right? Yeah. So Alan, do these agents respond to us or to you better because you are an attorney, or is it because you're explaining to them what they don't understand?
Well, maybe a little bit of both. Maybe it's just normal. You pose it correctly and they're going to respond fine. But whenever I say, and good news, there's some laws in place to protect everyone, they're probably going, oh, well, attorney's telling me that. Attorney can't lie to me. So we're probably good there. So maybe there might be a little bit of an asterisk behind me saying something versus a non-attorney.
Gotcha. Yeah, obviously that does make a lot of credibility. What I like to do is say, hey, listen, I just purchased 123 Main Street, 246, Ralph Street, whatever. Say, hey, these are all the deals that I've done. Go look at how they are. Here's a couple of testimonials, and then get a hold of Alan if you need an attorney to explain stuff to you, right? And I kind of just throw a little bit of everything, and have the time to say, okay, never mind, let's move forward.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah, one of my slides in my RAP University is, in fact, how to establish credibility. And what you do is you say, I've been doing this for a long time, long time here. Years on your belt to say that. A little bit of puffery is okay, lie, and then say, I've closed several of these. Several is 3 or more. So you don't have to have 40 under your belt or what have you. And then we work with a 30+ year attorney who drafts up all the documents legally, and we close at $1 million title office with insurance. So this thing is about as safe as it can be. So you're right on.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, especially JVing with somebody, you can say, hey, myself and my partner, let's say you haven't done any deals, but your partner is doing 2 or 3, right? Me and my partner have done a couple of them, right? So that's obviously very helpful. And Alan, going back to, I have a SubTo program, why? Because a lot of investors, especially in the communities that I was in, was asking me, hey, can you teach me SubTo? And I'm like, do you have 16 hours just to sit down and talk about it? I can't just teach you SubTo. in a 1 hour conversation, right? There's too much. Just like you can't teach a rap in an hour conversation. So you have a university called Rap University. In fact, you just had it in Austin this weekend. Talk to us about what happened there. I wasn't able to make it, but I know I sent some people down your way.
Yep. And I appreciate it. I met Nick, and we're kind of like Humphrey Bogart. I think it's the beginning of a beautiful relationship.
That's awesome.
So Rap University is cool. It is 4 hours long, and it takes you from the very, very beginning. What's the definition of rap? What's some terminology? What's, what is this? Through some examples, and then we go to how to find, how to negotiate, how to structure, how to contract, post-closing issues you need to deal with, and then also goes through the laws about what governs. So it's complete. I don't think there's anything that we're missing in there that could come up from start to finish. Yeah,
absolutely. So now I personally attended your live university when you had it here in San Antonio, maybe a year ago, maybe less than a year ago. And I thought that was some really great information. And, every time you listen to it, you pick up another nugget that finally makes sense. You kind of connect a couple of dots, talking about it. So anybody who's interested in that university, we'll talk more about it here at the end coming in. But let's go into a couple of step-by-step processes that you like to teach in your university. Alan, we have people here on the call. Tony Flores is asking how it would be helpful if, and then I guess Vince Ray answers, if you could share that one page for agents, and we'll probably talk about that here at the end on how that is possible. So let's look at a couple of slides, and you got a couple of definitions and facts regarding your university. And so let's talk about this, the mortgage wrap. What's a real mortgage wrap, and how does that play into the equation?
So I'll use the term mortgage wrap to mean both subject to assumption and also a wrap. So someone actually met with Nick yesterday. He gave me a good term. A subject to, in the way I drafted up and the way the documents are, is an exact wrap, meaning we're taking over exactly what's owed, while a wrap is a bigger loan around that smaller loan that's owed. So with that as our kind of foundation, when I say wrap, I'm talking about them all, whether it's SubTo, assumption wrap, it's either an exact wrap or a bigger note around a smaller note wrap. So all of those, like I said, I call them seller financing. And this is an actual slide from my presentation. I always say lawyers don't bold things and don't underline. We may put something in italics and then say emphasis added, but I'm putting bold and underline. And the reason is, like we were talking about, you got to conceptualize these things as just seller finance. The seller becomes the lender. I become the owner and borrower. I, as the investor, become the owner and borrower. And that underlying mortgage is not paid off. So it's not lease purchase option. It's not contract for deed. It's not rent to own. It is a conveyance of the property with the seller becoming the lender. And so that's absolutely step number one to embed in your brain before you can start going to talk about definitions and things, because I can't overemphasize how important it is, because I see people getting bogged down through, paralysis through analysis of trying to figure out, golly, I don't understand the mortgage isn't paid off. How do I do? Just stop it. It's seller finance and then move to the next step.
Yeah. Well, before we do that, Alan, you keep mentioning a term that I want to make sure we're clear on so that I fully understand as well. You're calling it a subject to assumption. Now, FHA has a different definition for that term, and so does a bank. So help me understand why you're calling it a subject to assumption.
So I'm going to is the next slide 4 or 5 definitions?
Let's see.
Nope, it's not. All right, so we can go back. When we say assumption, I'm taking this property via assumption, we're actually saying non-qualified assumption versus qualified assumption. So FHA and VAs back in 80s, before 90, they were assumable, and so that's an actual assumption. Whenever I say the word assumption, it's probably incorrect, but unfortunately, we use that term. So if we are going to use it, Immediately, if someone says assumption, you should say non-qualified assumption. And if they say assumption, it's a synonym of subject to. So I'm either assuming the obligations of the mortgage with or without lender approval, and it's always without now. Of the underlying mortgage, neither of them are with lender approval. So in my world, they're synonyms. A SubTo is an assumption, but you're thinking non-qualified assumption, and a non-qualified assumption is a SubTo. And I draft the exact same set of documents for those two. So some folks argue with me on it, and I'm a rap nerd, and I'll sit down with them all day long, especially if there's a scotch in front of me, and talk the same, but they're the same.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I got into SubTo is because I didn't want to do assumptions or get loans or get credit, right? So the way that I call it is, the way that I see it is, why should I use my credit to help somebody buy a house that doesn't have any credit, right? Because that's really what ends up doing. So that's the beauty of the subject to. You never have to use your credit to enable somebody to become a homeowner. Whereas in the standard traditional investor, they go apply for a loan, they get the loan, they buy the house, then they go and rent that house, and they're lucky that they're making $200 a month to pay back the mortgage and the loan and have $200 cash flow. But the moment that air conditioning goes out, now your $200 are worthless, because now you got to repair that and get another loan to pay for that rental, right? So to me, that just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's OPC, other people's credit. So
that's right.
And then you're limited. I forget if it's 7 or 10 by federal law mortgages that you can get, whether it was be an assumption or getting a new mortgage. Taking properties SubTo or by assumption allows you to have hundreds of mortgages under your control. So it's the absolute most superior way to leverage your dollars and leverage your credit, because you can take over hundreds.
Yeah. I was listening to one of our webinars with Pace, who runs the SubTo community, and he was actually instructing and educating Grant Cardone. And he was teaching, he says, FHA has a 17-page document teaching you how to buy a subject to property the right way. And so does the IRS. So I think sometimes if we don't do our research enough, especially real estate agents that have a viability to do this often and consistently with investors, and everybody wins, it would be to their benefit to find these articles and read and understand, as well as brokers, because many times an agent wants to do it, but their broker won't let them.
Yep. I see it all the time, and not to call out one particular brokerage, but to call out one. Keller Williams is famous for the broker saying we don't do these, and then they've got 70 agents under them, and 40 of them are doing wraps.
That's exactly right. When I was with Keller back in 2006, 2007, I was starting to do some of these, and they're like, "This is illegal. You cannot do this. We didn't train you this way." So I stuck around for 2 years, and then I left so that I could do real estate.
Yeah.
Tony Flores said, I like to say, would it be helpful if, when I'm introducing a new idea, let me just pop that up. I think he's talking about when he's talking to other agents about introducing SubTo opportunities. When I'm introducing a new idea and highlight the favorable things, would it be helpful if you got paid a commission and you got rid of what does it say of the property, got rid of the mortgage payments, and everyone is happy with the results? Yeah, absolutely, Tony. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Now, two things in regard to that. If there's a distressed seller, and they're behind on their mortgage, one of those benefits is we're going to start fixing your credit immediately. We're going to be making timely payments. It keeps you from having a foreclosure on your record, and so your credits will be benefited immediately. And then another benefit, if they're behind on their mortgage, is probably tight on equity. There's not much equity. Real estate agent may have to get in their commission. We can actually draft up documents where, okay, seller sells me the property. I'm obligated for that mortgage. I can pay above fair market value. So that above fair market value dollars, it could be used to pay the commission. And if we can't pay all the commissions, I can pay them out over 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, or what have you. So it could save the realtor getting their full commissions. It might be over time, but they're still going to get their full commissions. Those are two of the things that come to mind, Tony. And hey, Tony, good to see you again.
Absolutely. And you know what I like to do about that, when there is an agent involved, I either pay a flat fee or a reduced commission, because at the end of the day, you're the bank, you're the closing agent, you're paying for everything. At least that's what I do. I take over a SubTo, I pay for the closing costs, the transfer, or the commission, whatever it may be, and then maybe some money to the seller. But I like to either negotiate a flat fee with the agent, so everybody still wins, number one. Number two, I get the seller to pay the agent. Or number three, create a note with the agent that, like you said, pay over time, over 6 months, over 12 months, a certain amount, and he's still getting close to the amount of his commission. So there's so many different ways to still buy a SubTo.
Yeah, and you got to remember, you're the savior, you're the white on the horse, and without you, this boulder is not getting up the hill. So you're doing the great majority of the work and saying, hey, Mr. or Miss Agent, I'm going to save you, but I'm doing all the work. So I'm going to need you to reduce so we can save your client from losing their property. So exactly that. You're correct.
Yeah, I like that. Vince Ray saying, I had a seller ask me, what is the benefit to the seller selling on a SubTo?
So if they're distressed, you've got the benefit of the credit repair going on. If it's just a straight SubTo, it's not a wrap with a bigger note. It's not much, but if they're sitting there a distressed situation with a 2.75% note, I'm going to be able to pay more than fair market value, because the value for me is that 2.75. I go leverage it at 7%. I can create cash flow and equity where there wasn't before. So things like that are if they're distressed. If they're not distressed, you're probably going to have to pay above the interest rate interested. If they've got 50,000 equity in that thing, I'm usually buying that via a wrap and paying them the equity over X period of time at a higher interest rate. But just a straight SubTo, they need to be probably distressed to see the big benefit. Yeah.
And I guess the benefit has to do with the seller's point, right? Where is the seller in the transaction? Are they pre-foreclosure? Are they family loss? Are they lost their job? Do they have no equity and they're moving overseas, or they're moving to another state? It depends, right? So the benefit will depend really on the motivation, on who you're talking to. Like most of my SubTos that I have bought, they were not in distress in a sense. It's not like they were going to foreclosure. They just couldn't afford the mortgage anymore. That's all it was, for whatever reason, right? Maybe they got too much debt or they changed a job, but they were pretty much up to date. And it was really just trying to meet that need. And you're really just trying to solve the problem of where they come from. So
yeah, fast close is another benefit, because essentially it's the same speed as a cash deal. We just get the title commitment, draft up the loan documents, and close. We're looking at 14 days is comfortable, but often we're closing before foreclosure with 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, if you do find a foreclosure deal, those are the sweetest types of SubTos, because they'll sign anything you want them to sign, because they just want to get that lawsuit out of their head.
Yeah, and you're not having to explore for what their pain point is. You know what their pain point is.
Yeah, absolutely. Alan, we'll go over to the next slide if you like.
So I put this slide in there to answer, some of the questions. Everyone says, well, so it's like a lease purchase option or what have you. And so I kind of hammer that the property is conveyed. The seller no longer owns the property, but the mortgage stays in place. And that seller still has a legal obligation to pay that mortgage, because it wasn't a qualified assumption. In a qualified assumption, that seller steps out, new buyer comes in, new borrower comes in. But here the seller still has that obligation, but the lender is actually protected. And I said this to the legislature when the big bank lobbyist was saying, well, it puts us at higher risk. And I said, well, gosh, how is it higher risk if you have your borrower that has to pay and you have a new borrower that has to pay? It seems like you're in less risk now because you got 100% more people who have to pay, and big bank lobbyists didn't dig that too much. And so my loan documents draft up so that the buyer has the obligation to pay that mortgage. Obviously, we're not paying the dollars over to distressed seller. We're paying those dollars direct to the mortgage company. But like I say, there's not lease purchase option, rent to own, contract for deed, or land trust, or anything of that nature. It's a conveyance of the property from the seller to the buyer, and the seller's mortgage stays in place. And they're now they have a dual role. They're a borrower on that mortgage, but they're also a lender on my new set of loan documents. So this slide's designed to say, hey, it's a sale and seller is out of the deal now, other than being a lender.
Yeah. Now, while the seller has no obligation to pay the mortgage, his name's still legally bound to that mortgage for the duration of that loan.
I said they still have the obligation. There's just a person that has a superior obligation now.
Okay.
Superior obligation. And so there are, some questions about, hey, if my name's still on this loan, there's debt to income ratio issues. I can't get a new mortgage. And we have answers for that, where at the end of the day, they're going to get at least 80% of that debt taken off of that DTI ratio. But that might be for a different time, different meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's one of their questions, at least to me, is that, hey, what if I want to buy a new house? Yeah. What's going to happen to me if I were to have a mortgage? And so what I normally tell them, it says, after about 12 months of us making payments on this, the DTI is either number one going to fall, or number two, they're going to see consistency of payment. And I will show your new lender, or I can help you find a lender, that our obligation is us, and here's the payment proof of 12 months of us obligated to this loan.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, exactly that. Sometimes you have to get with the loan officer and say, do y'all have a situation where if I have a rental that's been rented out for 12 months that we can take off some of the debt on my DTIs? And the answer is yes. And I say, same thing here. It's exactly like a rental. You look at my payments coming in. If it's 80% that you're taking, then that 80% goes to reduce that debt by that 80% amount. So sometimes you're educating the loan officer.
Absolutely, yeah. But that's a great way to say it. I never thought about it that way. Just like they do a rental, that's right. Their name's on it, and you can have up to however many, 5-7 rentals at a time, 5-7 loans, FHA loans. I think
it's 7 loans that you can have at any given time. It could be 10. Don't hold me to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I like to tell the seller as a benefit, because I know Vince was asking, I like to always say to them, listen, instead of me going to Bank of America and getting a loan and taking me 45 days to try to even get that qualified, I'd rather turn you into the bank. And instead of me paying Bank of America, I'd rather pay you. And so sometimes that becomes a benefit to them in being able to allow me to buy it as a SubTo.
Yeah, if they have a bunch of equity, I don't want to put $1 down to buy a property, but I certainly don't want to put $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 if they have that equity. So I can buy that property via a wrap from them and let them know you can have right now down, or you're going to be a bank and getting interest payments at 4 or 5%. That way, in the end of 15 years, instead of $50,000, you're making $72,000. Do you want that? And a lot of times that turns them the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so here's a question here coming in with Vince, and I know many of us do use this, but Vince, is it recommended to use a servicing company?
So that's a big question. I'll tell you what I do. If I'm purchasing being a SubTo, I don't use a loan servicing company. I know I'm going to make that payment. Usually if you have an end user seller to an end user buyer, you want that third party loan servicing company, because the buyer doesn't want to trust that the seller is going to send the money, and the seller doesn't want to trust that the buyer's sending the money to the mortgage directly. So use that third party loan servicing company. And then another aspect of the answer is, if I buy that property SubTo and then I go seller finance it to someone, if I want to maybe sell that note in the future, you have to use that RMLO to maximize what you can sell that note for. So you definitely want to use it then. And then finally, if I'm selling more than 3 seller finance rep transactions in a 12-month rolling period, I have to use an RMLO on that, and I have to use a third-party loan servicing company to comply with the laws.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was a big question, Vince.
Yeah. You know the way I look at this one, Ellen, is I always use a servicing company on my wraps simply because I prefer to have a third party person deal with all of that admin paperwork, because I don't want to get sued saying, hey, I thought I got your check. I didn't get your check. I didn't get it to the bank. Somebody didn't pay the mortgage.
Too much escrow. You didn't give me a payoff in time. You did. Yes. I agree 100%, Alex, 100%. I don't want that.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want that mess. So Vince, yes, we absolutely encourage you to use a servicing company. And there's many out there. I use escrow specialists. I love them. They're in Utah. They're not very expensive, but they take care of everything for me. At the end of the year, they send the 1099 interest payments to the seller, to myself. They send the payments to the bank, right? Whenever a wrap mortgage is being paid off or refinanced, they help you take care of all of that. And in fact, Alan, you guys just helped me do one this week. I did a refinance on one of our deals with your team, and that went smoothly. It was really, really good. So yeah, the answer is absolutely. We'll ask another question here. Would you like to go to the next slide?
Either way. I'm following you, Alex.
Yeah, no worries. Let's talk about this.
So to keep hammering the aspect of the seller finance status of these transactions, I say there's two types of seller finance transactions in the world. There's ones where there's no underlying lien. We use the term properties owned free and clear, and then the seller's over there seller financing it. And so we're drafting up the TREC 1-4 contract and the seller finance addendum. And then you bounce over to the other type of seller finance transaction, and those are where there's an underlying lien. And then the three different types I put there, again, there's actually only two. It's either a seller finance mortgage wrap, where there's a bigger note wrapping around a smaller note, or it's a SubTo/assumption, where it's an exact wrap, a new note that's exactly the same as the existing note. But like I said before, we're still just using the TREC 1-4 and the seller finance addendum on the mortgage wrap transactions. Now on the SubTo, we do have it's called an assumption addendum by TREC. So there's that TREC assumption addendum that we use as opposed to seller finance. But you actually could use a seller finance. Now that I think about it, you use a seller finance addendum, and then just in special provisions, you say there's an existing mortgage, payoff is X dollars, interest rate on that mortgage is X dollars. You could just use a seller finance on both, but this is another slide to try to hammer people in. It's just seller finance and hopefully understanding it more easily.
Yeah, so to clarify, to create this type of transaction in Texas, you use the 1-4 contract, the Texas TREC promulgated form that you can use, an agent can use, individual can use. You don't need to be a licensed agent to use the TREC forms. Is that correct, Alan?
Correct. TAR you do, TREC you don't.
Yeah, right. So you can use a TREC form, you fill it out accordingly, and then you go and get the seller financing addendum. You add it as part of the package. And then there's also the 5.016 form that needs to be used, right, along with that.
Yep.
That's part of the Texas Property Code. No.
Yep.
Yes, Texas Property Code, right? That's basically saying, hey, we're taking over this property subject to transaction. We're not necessarily telling the bank, but everybody says we're good to it. We're all agreeing, the seller and buyers agreeing that we're going to take over this loan. Do you also, though, Alan, need to have any type of disclosures? I know before, with an attorney I used to close with, had, I don't know, about like 30 disclosures, right? I'm not under an illegal influence right now. No one's forcing me to sell my house right now. What do you think about those types of disclosures?
So I have a big, a document that I'm trying to eradicate off of the web. I used to using it, and it had that big old long list of check here, check here, check here.
Yeah.
And I think it's over inclusive. I shouldn't say I think it's over inclusive. And Pace has his contracting, that his contracting's badass. I like it. It's just it's not better than the Texas contract. So you can cherry pick some things, the out of tracks, what's good. But I have kind of a, I don't want to say one size fits all, but the critical things out of my form that I pull out, and I have a little one-page addendum that really is kind of just a overkill of disclosure of this is a wrap or SubTo transaction, so that there's no confusion 3 years down the line when the seller says, hey, you were a mortgage, and I show them in 19 different places literally where we disclosed it was a wrap transaction. So I don't I'm not saying I'm better than anyone. I'm just saying those 4, 5, 6 page addenda that have me make the seller initial by each clause and paragraph in each page, I think they're overkill, in my opinion.
Got it. So going back to this graph that you're talking about, Alan, we're really talking about no underlying loan, meaning you're buying it from the seller, but there's no, he doesn't have, it's free and clear.
Perfect. Yep. Yep.
And then the underlying loan is still the seller selling to you, but you're having to wrap his mortgage or do an exact wrap. In other words, I'm buying it to,
Yep.
If you owe $200,000 to the bank, I'm buying it for $200,000 from you because that's what you owe the bank. Yep.
Yep. And again, let's ignore that there's an existing mortgage. So if there's a payoff of $200,000 and it's a SubTo, I don't really, once I know what that payoff is, I don't care. It's done. It's gone. I'm just buying seller finance $200,000. And if there's $200,000 and I'm buying it for a $400,000 loan, I can ignore that $200,000. I'm just buying it for $400,000. It's exactly the same left side of the graph. If there was no lien, and I take care of all the niceties. When I draft up my loan documents, I'm the one that's worrying about whether there's a mortgage or not. You really don't have to worry about it while you're trying to craft the structure or anything. You find out what the payoff is, you negotiate purchase price, and you move along.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, because the beauty of this here is then I know how much I can get arbitrage monthly, right? Because I bought it for $200,000 and he's at, let's say, $1,200 a month. I know I can sell it for $250 at $1,600 a month. As long as you have those two
Yep.
equations done accordingly, and you know that the monthly mortgage to the lender already includes PITI, it includes a mortgage interest or mortgage insurance if it's needed, and anything that needs to be paid back is paid back in time to either cure the note or make it stable, you're good to go on and able to sell it, right? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, I didn't think about it, but I do the same thing. I guess I purchased the property. It was about $190,000. The payment owed to the mortgage company was $1,400. I just went out and found someone that would pay $1,900 a month. Don't really care what the interest rate was. I wanted to cash flow $500. So I just found that buyer, ignored the fact that there's an existing mortgage, and I'm seller financing to them. Created the $1,900 a month.
Yeah, yeah. And that's way better than rent because you never have to deal with a clogged toilet.
Some people have the formal, what do they call it? Formal test or whatever, to deal with those roofs that need to be repaired, ACs that need to be replaced, toilets that break. And then you get to build that big, large appreciation, landlord, owner of that property. I just don't want it. I don't want to change my own toilet when it breaks, much less, 15, 20, 30 others properties I'm not living in.
Well, I mean, it decides, do you want to do a $20 job and have 5 of those jobs? Because if you buy 5 of those, you got a full-time job. Well, just one is a full-time job. Imagine 5 of those because you want to be a landlord. Well, you get yourself a full-time $20 job is what you did. Versus on the seller financing, you just became the bank. You don't have to do anything. It's just money flowing in. Big difference. My thought.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I agree.
Vince was saying I always hit a bump when we have a lot of equity. Did we already talk about that one? I think we might have.
No. But I mean, you shouldn't hit a speed bump. You're gonna have to obviously pay more. I don't want to pay that equity at time of purchase. So I'm going to tell them, good news, you're going to make money on your, I could pay you the 40,000 you have in equity now, but you just need 10 to your next place. I'm going to, you carry $30,000 making 5% per month. Again, at the end of 15 years, instead of 30, got 47,000. I do it that way. Just make sure I'm, I figure out the price that I want to buy it at. And then if they, great. And if not, then I move to the next one.
Awesome. Let's go to the next slide. Terminology.
So we've hit most. I kind of, I guess, did a prelude to it, but there's our two qualified and non-qualified assumption words, which I wish we could get rid of the word assumption. We've got to keep it. We just have to understand when someone says I'm property via subject to, they're saying I'm taking it via qualified assumption. I'm assuming the underlying loan, and the lender's not checking me, not approving. It's a don't ask, don't tell. And the legislature, they toyed with the idea of requiring the lender to approve. And it was kind of said, all right, who are we going to ask? So Wells Fargo is the lender. Do we send the letter to Mr. Wells or Mr. Fargo? With our payment, no one's going to answer us. If you, I implore someone, go ahead, send a letter to any mortgage company and say, hey, okay, if I take this over via a non-qualified assumption. And I don't think you're going to ever get an answer. It doesn't have a place to land. It doesn't have a to land. And so those are the two assumptions. And so therefore, synonyms of subject to an assumption. That's also called the exact. I start using quite a bit. I don't know if I have to put an asterisk and put Nick credit there, but he used that word yesterday. And then mortgage wrap is obviously when you're buying it with a note that's larger than the existing note. And then to confuse things, I use mortgage wrap to all of them, because to me, they are all wraps, either an exact wrap or a mortgage wrap that has a larger note.
So on non-qualified assumptions or qualified assumptions, either one. So most lenders won't, obviously, like you said, you're talking about Chase, Wells Fargo, Citibank, these big guys. They're not going to even figure out, because you can send them a FedEx package and it still won't get to the right person, even though they give you an address, right? Like it's such a mammoth that nobody talks to each other in those departments. It's just so confusing. But if you deal with a small bank, Frost Bank, you deal with a San Antonio Federal Credit Union, those types of loans, I would say sometimes you do have to be a little bit more careful because they're smaller and they audit a little bit more.
Yeah. And I should have actually mentioned that. I think Randolph Brooks down there and the other credit unions you mentioned?
San Antonio Federal Credit Union.
Yeah. You don't want to wrap those. You don't want to take those SubTo or what have you. You would actually, want either take the risk if flip exit strategy. You're wrap it for 3 months. By the time they find out and they tell you, hey, no, you're selling the property, but no long-term hold.
Right.
And I always say from it, go ask. Go say, hey, your lender's in trouble here, or your borrower's in trouble here. I'm going to come and start paying the note. Can I take this over? And if you get an email back or something by chance and they say, yeah, then move forward with it. But understand your exit strategy on those small banks and credit unions needs to be a shorter term.
Yeah. USAA is another one that you don't want to deal with, or like you said, short term. So that's a good one. Under your subject to assumption, you mentioned the seller is not owed funds under a promissory note. And that's because you're saying that you're buying it almost like an exact amount and you're not owing them anything. Like you're not promising to pay them anything. They were literally just walking away with maybe $100 consideration.
Yeah, we're paying them some cash sometimes, but they're not owed any, I should say, additional funds. Yeah, I'm obligated to pay that mortgage, but I don't owe them any money. So if you're using a third-party loan servicing company, I send the money there. It all goes to the bank. Nothing's going to the seller.
Right. Yeah. And those are around, especially the foreclosure ones. Many times, those are perfect ones where you're not having
Oh
to
yeah.
pay them anything, and those are great. Excellent. All right, well, good. Let's jump over to your next slide here. I having too much slide. That's not it. Was that my last slide?
It may have been,
That may have been my last slide. Okay, let me leave it there. Let me come back over
but
here.
and what I was going to do, I don't know, you run the schedule and the format. After you get all this conceptualized, now, and I think next week we're going to talk about the actual contracting for things. So we sort of hinted at what's the kind for and stuff, but now once you have it conceptualized, you're ready to go start talking to people. I can buy your property, seller finance, so no problem, move forward. Next question: do you have to pay off this mortgage to go and buy a new house right now? Nope. Going to live with grandma, going to rent, already have a house purchased. Then it's incumbent upon you to use all your skills to let them know that they can sell this seller finance, and we're ready to go start with the Trek 1 to 4.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what I do, Alan, in many times in my coaching with SubTo, my SubTo program, when students or investors or agents want to learn how to do this, I obviously, my time is as valuable as theirs. So when they become part of my coaching program, I help them walk through those conversations. I get on the call with the agent and them, so they're learning. I teach them how to do the paperwork. I teach them the conversation as well. And then how do then we prepare for that wrap? And then that's where your wrap university comes in, about how do we do it accordingly and appropriately at the same time. So I think, a little bit of merging of both ideologies or both strengths is important, especially for new people that are wanting to really expand their portfolios in SubTo wraps.
You're 100% correct. The reason you and I can coexist on a program where you have a coaching program, a wrap university, is because when you're finished up with my wrap university and you understand it, then you need a coach. It'd be like if I taught you how to do blacksmithing without you ever swinging the hammer. You can't do that. So I'm all the informational side of things that allow you to conceptualize this, and then you're showing them how to swing that hammer and forge that new sword. If any new investor ever asks me what's the best piece of advice you give someone, I say, if you're the proverbial dog that's caught, so you're out there negotiating and they're agreeing to sell that property via wrap, you immediately go partner with someone, give them the deal and learn from them, and do that 2 or 3 times, not just once. And then once you got your feet underneath you, that you can handle the left turns and right turns and such, then you can go on your own when you're comfortable. But when you come out of my course, conceptually, you can go do things yourself, but you should not. You should have a mentor. You should have a coach that shows you how to handle all of the questions that are going to come up, handle all the objections, how to establish credibility, all those things.
For a good 4 years, I tried to do all this by myself. And I did a couple of flips and I was relatively okay with it. But for me to scale, I really needed a coach. I didn't really scale until I understood the power of a coach that has gone through 1,001 more errors than you have, so that you don't have to, right? And at the same time, they're teaching you the procedures that are accountable and are correct. So thank you for that. Your Wrap University, how do people get a hold of you for your Wrap University, Alan?
So you can go to my website, sesker.com. So that's probably the easiest way, if you can in fact spell Sesker, which I get confused sometimes. And then that'll take you over to, that'll actually have a link to wrapu.sesker.com. I'm hoping that Wrap University eventually becomes the #1 response if you just put those 2 words into Google. But yeah, go over to sesker.com and that'll have all the information how to contact us and this, that. But Alex, I want to go back just a little bit. As a tremendous example, you and I, in the terms of what we have, the offers we have, I've got a slide that says, hey, when you purchase that property subject to every single exit strategy, if it's a fix and flip or equity partnering or a short-term rental or long-term rental or what have you, I tell them that. They don't know what the exit strategy is. That's where mentor and coach. I was going to include all those nuances that coaches include. We're talking about a 3-4 day program versus a 4-hour program. But that one slide would be a prototypical example of how I'm telling you now, go get some, execute all.
Absolutely, because I read somewhere. I think it was Jay Abraham. He's a master consultant, been around forever. Jay Abraham. One of the things he said, he says, we did a study on people buying products from Timothy Robbins, from himself, from all these big guys, Brian Tracy and such. Most people will buy the product, the package, the video series, but 80% of them won't even open the package or read the book. So they buy it and they put it on the shelf. That 20% open the book and read it, but don't necessarily all act on it, right? So only less than 1% actually use all that material and actually turn it into cash. So I think with the Rap University is amazing because that's learning, but we want 10% of people or 20% of people actually making it happen. And sometimes you do need that little bit of hand-holding because even after you've read everything, you say, okay, yeah, that's a lot of info, but where do I start? Well, that's where they can.
And I will say, if you attend Rap University program, we are watching to see if you're clicking through all the modules. So you'll get an email that says, hey, you didn't do it.
Yeah. Get off your butt and click the modules. So Alan, when they go to sheshkar.com, they can subscribe to it there immediately.
Yeah, there's a hyperlink that'll take you to sheshkar.com. So just a little bit easier saying all that. Or heck, they can just email us and we'll point them the direction.
Absolutely. And those who are interested to be part of our coaching program as well, just contact me on Facebook as you are right now or IG. Let us know and we'll send you a link as well on that. Let's go ahead and finish off with one very last question here. Vince, who's been very active. Thank you, Vince, for being active today. He's basically talking about the insurance, which is part of the wrap. And it is a very important part because if you don't do it right, nobody gets paid on if there's a deal on that property.
So in my course, every due on sale clause. I call it the famous due on sale clause, and the least seen issue out there in the wild. And if you Google, you'll find, hey, careful, due on sale clause. If you Google, you won't find any warning about doing the insurance correctly. And it's the absolute most seen problem with mortgage wrap transactions. So you're very, very astute. So a thumbnail of how the insurance is taken care of. But bottom line, seller is terminating their insurance. They get their refund for the remainder of the period. Buyers buying new insurance on that. And the part that's tricky is the declaration page, the information that goes up to the mortgage company. Buyer is going to be the insured. Seller has to be listed as an additional interest on that. Mortgage company is going to be under the mortgagee clause. The seller actually comes under the mortgagee clause because, as everyone knows from our video today. And then this has to be packaged all correctly. So everything I just said, I'm parroting from insurance agents that know how to do this. You can tell an insurance agent, but the way that they communicate the information up to the mortgage company is where the magic is. Have to be familiar. The insurance agent has to be familiar with insurance and educating the mortgage company about that insurance. So Vince, you do have to be careful with that. And you absolutely, I always say, if you're getting all your insurance from Aunt Betty and it's all packaged and you're getting a great reduction because of that, you're not using her for this. And you can't ask her, hey, do you know how to do this? But yes. And then they call me and ask me how to do it. And I say, no, not my liability. So yeah, get tried and true and proven insurance agent.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to make sure you have an insurance agent that understands you are creating a wrap. And that's who I use all the time. And we have 3 or 4 different strategies because sometimes that insurance will get kicked back by the bank if you did not write it appropriately, and nobody's going to get insured.
Right.
Alan, thanks again for your amazing time. Any last minute thoughts you'd like to mention?
No, other than I'm looking forward to next week when I think we're going to talk about contracting and get into some nitty gritty on that, because that's that's the second part that people to down. It's like, all right, I understand these things. All right, sellers agree to it. Gee golly whiz, how the heck do I contract for this? And you know that stuff. I would pose that you know it better than me, but we're all talking about that next week, I think.
That's awesome. Alan, thanks for your time. Thanks everybody for joining in. We'll see you next Thursday, same time, 12 o'clock, same bat channel, same bat time. Talk to y'all later.